launch of the Witch Queen has brought a ton of positive changes to Destiny 2, with one of the biggest additions being the introduction of Void 3.0, where now you have stasis-inspired layout with aspects and fragments, but for Void, allowing for more customization than ever, and is essentially combining the 3 Void trees into one, which makes for some deadly build options on this subclass. Add in this change with the unexpected changes Bungie has made specifically to the 2 Nova Bomb variants, and Void Warlock just got a lot deadlier. I'm going to go through some of the big changes you need to know along with my recommendations for the aspects and fragments you should be running to slay out in the Crucible. Starting with the Vortex Nova Bomb, they have made the radius at least visually a little larger, but then added that on impact the Vortex now pulls nearby enemies into the lingering damage field. This is incredibly useful for bringing enemies a touch closer to the tick damage of the super and helps make up for the smaller blast radius. Next, we have Cataclysm, and with this variant, they increased the travel speed by 30%, which is substantial and noticeable. I don't think you'll see many people calling this Nova Bomb variant Slova much longer. They also added the change that the Seekers that come out after your Nova Bomb explodes now have a slight delay to reduce instances of them being caught in the first detonation and being destroyed prematurely. This is another massive change, since I thought it was intentional that sometimes you wouldn't get Seekers with the Slova subclass, but turns out it was just a bug. Lastly, you have Nova Warp, which is unchanged, and spoiler alert, it is still terrible. This brings me to my first recommendation for this build, and that's to run Cataclysm variant of Nova Bomb for Void 3.0. First, because of the changes we just mentioned, it has removed a lot of the original downsides the super used to have, since it now travels faster and now you will reliably have those Seekers. Second, the blast radius is significantly larger than the Vortex variant. Then you add in the tracking and Seekers, and it can be pretty difficult to whiff this Nova Bomb. Not to mention, with all the bubble titans running around, and having the Seekers usually guarantees you get a kill on those annoying bubble titans. For the more basic part of our build, starting with the jump, you want to be running Burst Glide, as this is universally known as the best feeling jump for Warlock, since it's the least floaty and allows you to build momentum as you move around the map, therefore also making it the fastest jump for Warlock. For your class ability, I still recommend Healing Rift, since survivability is king in the Crucible, and a Healing Rift turns you into an absolute tank. For your grenade, I recommend Axiom Bolt, since it has one of the lowest cooldowns out of all your grenade options, and when paired with certain aspect, which we'll get into later, is especially deadly and makes for some easy kills. I mean, it's a grenade that tracks multiple enemies for you. I don't know what else you could want. Next is the Void Warlock's new melee ability, Pocket Singularity. Launch an unstable ball of void energy that detonates when it nears a target, pushing them away from the blast and makes them volatile. This new ability is the void version of Celestial Fire, but with less range. The effective range of this ability is in the close to medium range, and if you use it in this range, this ability can have pretty aggressive tracking. For example, I've been able to kill opponents who I know are weak just behind the corner, since the ability can change directions fairly aggressively if you are in that close to mid range. Now, this ability only does about 60 damage, so it's not going to generate a bunch of kills on its own. It does have some great utility as a primer for a fight, or to slow down shocker rushers in a fight since it pushes them backward. What you often will find with this ability is it leaves your enemy pretty disoriented, since it throws them back unexpectedly and makes them volatile. This can be a double-edged sword, especially when your enemy goes flying in the heat of battle and they become more difficult to track. Overall, this new melee ability is good, but it isn't something I see myself building around. Before we start discussing aspects, I want to quickly mention my community Discord, where you can show off your roles, builds, and even Destiny fashion. We also have a ton of very knowledgeable players looking to help people improve. Link is in the description. Getting to our aspects, we have some old favorites and a new addition that gives us some interesting options for our build. Starting with old reliable, and that's Chaos Accelerant. Hold to overcharge your grenade, making it deadlier and more effective. As you can see on screen, this aspect affects different grenades differently, and for some grenades does nothing at all. But for the sake of our build, we'll be using Chaos Accelerant and Axiom Bolt, since this gives us one additional Seeker and causes the Axiom to travel a little faster. But unlike before, Axions now do 100 damage across the board compared to the 125 they used to do previously. So a little bit of a nerf, but nonetheless still very potent and a great playstarter for any engagement. Now, these next two aspects will really have some tough choices to make, since both of these aspects have a lot of utility but provide almost the opposite benefits. Starting with the new aspect of the two, and that's the Child of the Old Gods. Cast your Rift to create a Void Soul. When you damage a target with a weapon, your Void Soul flies to them and drains them, doing damage and weakening them. When a target is being drained, you are granted grenade and melee energy if running Healing Rift, or health if running Empowering Rift. Defeating a target who is being drained by your Void Soul grants class ability energy. This aspect is great for creating a distraction for the enemy team, since once your Void Soul flies in, it creates a zone that if anyone steps into it, they begin ticking for 11 damage and become weakened, causing them to take even more damage from any other sources. And yes, these damage ticks mean that the Void Soul can actually kill enemies, or at the very least pull their attention and delay their recovery. This ability is great for generating an opening push, since your enemies will begin taking that additional damage, and while they are focused on your Void Soul, you can fly in and take advantage of their attention being diverted. Not to mention, this ability is great for getting a ton of ability energy back, especially if you're running 100 recovery, which I always recommend, since you'll be getting this Void Soul multiple times per game to give you huge bursts of ability regen each time. Another way this ability is great is for when you want to challenge supers, since it can make that player in super weaker and easier to kill. This aspect is especially valuable in a mode like Control, where you can fire at enemies on a point, or as enemies enter a choke point and have your Void Soul fly in and start draining multiple players at once, setting you up for some easy kills and ability regen. Overall, this aspect's biggest value comes in the ability to create a distraction for your enemies and delay their recovery, along with increased ability uptime when used correctly. For our last aspect, we have another returning favorite, Feed the Void. Defeat a target with a Void ability to activate Devour. While Devour is active, final blows restore health and extend Devour. This has always been one of my favorite Warlock Void abilities in Destiny 2 because it directly impacts our survivability, since any Void ability, including our super, triggers this ability. This ability has been the sole reason I've survived casting my Nova Bomb or been able to 1v3 an enemy team, since the team is not expecting your health to suddenly jump back up to full. What makes this aspect even more potent is the fact that with Void 3.0 you can pair Feed the Void with Chaos Accelerant and Axiom Bolts, which are good for a couple free kills a game, making it much easier to proc Devour, and when you get kills in Devour, that also gives you a nice chunk of your grenade energy back as well, creating a nice synergy between these two aspects, which is why for this build I recommend Feed the Void and Chaos Accelerant, which has been the dream pairing for so long. You get the power and insane tracking of overcharged Axiom Bolts combined with the survivability and health regen of Devour, along with the grenade energy regen, beginning your Axiom back even faster. Now this isn't to say that Child of the Old Gods isn't great, because it definitely is, but it's really hard to beat an ability that gives you full health instantly on ability kills. If you found this video helpful so far, consider subscribing so you don't miss any future build videos just like this one. For our fragments, and our first choice is going to be Echo of Leeching. Melee final blows start health regen for you and nearby allies, plus 10 resilience. This fragment further plays into that survivability fantasy we get with Devour, since on melee kills your health will immediately start regenning. And similarly to Devour, this fragment has been a huge reason I can survive long enough to get out of a fight or win a 1v2. This fragment essentially is like a less powerful version of Karnstein Armlets, with the only difference being that if you get damaged, the regen stops. But even with that, I've often found it regens more than enough to allow me to survive a fight and reset for the next engagement. The other cool thing is there doesn't seem to be any real cooldown on this fragment, and you can chain multiple melee kills together. Then we also get the plus 10 resilience, which means if you invest in resilience like me, then you can free up a mod slot to invest in other stats, but more on that later. Echo of Remnants is our next fragment and increases the lingering grenade effects, and for this build that means our Axiom Bolts track for even longer. This is great because often the enemy will stop running thinking the Axiom has stopped tracking them, but with this fragment we will catch them off guard and can secure an easy kill, or at the very least do some good damage to prime our enemy to be killed. For our last fragment, I recommend Echo of Expulsion. Void ability final blows cause targets to explode and gives plus 10 intellect. This ability is a successor to the Bloom effect from Top Tree Void, and on Void kills can do an additional 30 damage when enemies are killed by your Void ability. This fragment is helpful for turning a single grenade kill into a double when enemies are close enough together, or at the very least do some nice chip damage to make the enemy that much weaker for the fight. Overall, I had two rules as I chose my fragments, the first being I steered away from fragments that negatively impacted my stats, and secondly, chose fragments that complemented the strongest aspects of the build, which is mainly focused on making our Axiom Bolts as deadly as possible to proc Devour as often as possible. Getting into our stats that I use for this build, and we're going to start with the most important ones first, starting with recovery. I always recommend running 100 recovery to get your Rift cooldown nice and low. The Rift is so powerful in Destiny 2 and just really helps the Warlock's overall survivability in this game. It allows you to tank a ton of damage and really lock down certain points of the map once in your Rift. You'll often notice that players sometimes will just leave you alone once they see you in your Rift, so the more we can get back that class ability, the better. The next most important part of this build is going to be our grenade, and this is where tier 8 is really the sweet spot for me. You really start getting into diminishing returns once you go even to tier 8, 9, 10, so I could probably even lower this even more if I wanted to, but I had the extra stats, so I figured why not. And this brings our cooldown with our Axiom Bolts to 45 seconds, assuming we aren't triggering any other of our abilities that help regen that grenade even quicker, or any other perks on our weapons that are going to trigger that grenade regen even quicker. So 45 is going to be the absolute longest, which is already pretty insane considering how powerful overcharged axiom bolts are. Next most important stat I would argue would be intellect, and I would say tier 7, tier 8 is really a sweet spot here. As you can see, that brings our super ability cooldown all the way to 6 minutes and 39 seconds for Cataclysm. So it's going to be getting our super nice and early, especially if we're slaying out. We're going to be one of the first ones to get our super in a game, which is always a huge benefit. From there, I would say the next most important is going to be resilience. Again, this is going to help your survivability just a little bit more, especially in those closer shotgun battles. Gives you that little sliver of health left sometimes when you're fighting in some of those closer gunfights. From there, we also have our strength, and again, we have pocket singularity, the new Warlock melee ability. But again, not something I would necessarily build around, so I like landing around tier 5. Gets me around that 1 minute mark for my melee ability cooldown. And last, and definitely least, at least for me, is mobility. I don't value this stat at all. When I've run tier 4 mobility, which is like the highest I would recommend if you're going to invest in this stat, I don't really notice it at all. So I highly recommend, if you have extra stats, put those in other areas of your build to really help with the overall synergy, because mobility on Warlock, in my opinion, is just a waste, especially if you're running transversive steps as your exotic. But overall, I'd say recovery, discipline, and intellect are going to be your 3 for this build overall, and for probably a majority of builds on Warlock, honestly. But these are the 3, especially for the build I've laid out here for us today, that you're really going to want to make sure you're investing in. Again, you'll need to go as high as tier 8 on discipline. I think you probably go a touch lower, but if you got the extra stats, I would put them in discipline or intellect, assuming you've already hit 100 recovery and around tier 5 strength. And then quickly running through our mods, and as I talk about in a lot of my different build videos, I always recommend just running mods that are enhancing the weapons you're using. If you know me, all I basically run is shotgun and hand cannon, so I'm running shotgun targeting and hand cannon targeting, but the one from the artifacts only takes 1 energy, so I'm pretty stoked about that being a part of the artifact this season. And then I'm running Apathettic aspects for my exotic. I'm sure there's some other exotics you can run, like transversive steps, or even Karnstein armlets if you want to double down on the survivability of this build and like pairing that with Devour. But I just love the feel Apathettic aspect gives to my weapons, makes them super snappy, makes them reload quicker, and just overcomes a lot of the downsides a lot of weapons have. Like for example, this shotgun I'm running here, the handling is 37, it's absolutely terrible, but because of Apathettic aspect, this shotgun feels 10 times better and makes it a lot more usable, because the shotgun is pretty strong in the crucible right now. I also run fastball on here, and if you guys don't know, fastball is going to give you increased grenade throw distance, which is very important to have, especially since this build revolves a lot around our axiom bolts. From there, I'm running unflinching hand cannon aim and unflinching shotgun aim, just to make sure I'm being impacted by flinch from being shot as little as possible from other players. Lastly, or I guess not lastly, but almost lastly, I'm running shotgun holster with Radiant Light. Radiant Light, these menus are killing me, is going to give you plus 20 strength, make it a little bit easier to reach that 50 stat distribution on your strength to get that roughly 1 minute cooldown. I like shotgun holster because, again, just one less thing I have to worry about, make sure my shotgun is always loaded. I do for some reason have a habit of forgetting to reload my shotgun, which often has gotten me killed. And lastly here, I'm running quick charge. Quick charge is going to allow you to really increase the ready speed of your shotgun, which is what I'm using, or if you use a submachine gun or a fusion rifle, that'll help as well. And then pair that with a quick access sling on this rag. I'm just going to call it the rag shotgun because I don't want to try to pronounce the name. It makes this shotgun feel a lot better, and this is the shotgun I've been maining lately. The other hand cannon I've been maining is the Cantata 57. It's kind of a world drop. I believe you can get it from just depositing Umbral Engrams at Rahul. I just got mine while playing the Witch Queen Legendary campaign. I got small bore, accurized, rapid hit, rangefinder with stability masterwork. I would have preferred this to be range, but I'm still very happy with this roll overall. And this hand cannon has been absolutely beast. As you can see for the season, I already have 418 kills on it because I've been absolutely loving it. Sights are super clean and recoil is very nice. So if you don't have like a palindrome or something like that, this is a very viable replacement. And it has the origin trait of Suros Synergy. Reloading grants this weapon bonus handling and reduce incoming flinch for a short time. Check and check. I love increased handling and I love reduced flinch. So I love the Suros Foundry in Destiny right now because of this trait right here. And then from there, I'm just running Gjallarhorn. Don't really need to worry about heavy too much. But overall, if you wanted to really take this build to the next level, if you had like Eyes Luna with Demolitionist or a weapon with Adrenaline Junkie to really get even more out of those Axion bolts or a way to get your grenades back faster, that's the only way you can really take this build to the next level. With Void 3.0, Warlock is more powerful than ever with the ability to not only wield overcharged Axion bolts, but simultaneously use those Axion bolts to proc Devour, to regen our grenade and health, to really take our survivability and health regen to a whole different level. With that, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.